All right, so let's go ahead and work on getting the ignition side crank seal installed. It's really just time to do that so we don't have to worry about protecting the bearings anymore. Okay, so there's a number of things involved here. First, the workshop service manual for this vintage of saws covered by the Husqvarna 200 series saws. There is a workshop service manual for this, but it doesn't, let's see. Actually, I did find it, and at any rate, the depth of the sealing ring or oil seal is actually 4.5 millimeters below the outside edge of the crankcase. So for our purposes, it is this little red ring. That's the outside. And I was able to confirm that measurement on the saw using a caliper. So that's what the oil seal was stalled at, and that is to spec. Okay, so the oil seals are the same for both sides, and of course on the other side of the saw, that oil seal is installed in the oiler housing. That's a different process, we'll show that, but the sealing rings are the same, and that is the number for it right there. Okay, that's what the sealing ring or the oil seal looks like. And let's make sure you're focused here. Okay. Now you'll notice there's the woodruff key right there. That's not as bad as having a slot across the shaft for catching the seal, but it still could potentially damage the seal. Okay, so the first thing is that we have a sleeve here. This is the same sleeve. I'll show this when installing the seal from the oiler housing over the clutch side. But it'll enable us to basically bridge that woodruff key, or the vast majority of it, and completely keep it from causing any issues. Okay, so that's the first thing. And what we're going to do is put a little bit of grease on the inside of this sealing ring. Okay, and then holding it like this, I'm going to grab a little bit of gasket maker and just a light seal or a light film of sealant is going to go on the outside there. And actually I might do it just before I send it off this sleeve, so that I'm not, causing any issues with removing the sealant. It's just a precaution so that if there's any scratches in the inside of the crankcase, that nothing's going to end up causing a problem for it. And what I'm going to do is, once I have it in place over the sleeve, I'm just going to take this mandrel, which is actually for a 257, and it's slightly bigger than the inside diameter of the crank here, and that's going to fully bridge the seal, and it'll get it down to about the top of the crankcase. And of course I got to get it a little bit lower than that, 4.5 millimeters to be exact. And then it turns out that a 19 millimeter socket is perfectly sized so that it doesn't cause a problem with the inside of the seal, where the edge of that seal is, where the inside spring is, but it'll just fit perfect. It'll fit on the inside there, so I can then continue to drive it home to get it at the proper depth. I'll have to do that very carefully. So at any rate, that's our process here today. Okay, so let me get started here. You will also note that I have a board. You can kind of see it on this side, and that's just a 2x stock. And what it is so that I'm not grounding or bottoming out on my bar bolts or the crankcase on the other side, so that I've got a nice flush raised and flush surface, so that when I drive those seals home using the mandrel, I've got a good solid surface. So hopefully that makes some sense to you. All right, so you don't need much grease. The grease is here really just to help you with the fitting. It won't cause any problems. This is, in fact, greasing the inside of this is to spec. That's what they recommend. Having a little bit of grease here on the inside will not cause any issues. Okay. So we've got the inside of that greased up. And now I'm just gonna start this onto that fitting sleeve, okay? So we're just getting ready for actually driving it home. That's all, okay? And you see I could just take it off like that. So I could have fit it on previously by hand. And I think that's actually what I'm going to do here, because it will be a lot nicer to use that fitting sleeve as I apply a little bit of sealant. You could use Durco, you could use Moto Seal, you know, basically any of those gasket makers, any of the sealants, you know, that are used for this kind of stuff. Moto Seal is fairly pliable, I guess, or goopy. I don't know how you want to say it, and it won't set up right away, so it makes it pretty nice to work with. Anyway, you can see that I just had a little dab. Okay, so all I'm going to do is make sure that there is a very light coating. I'm going to go over that a couple times with my finger. Really light coating, and then I am going to try and make sure that there is none of that sealant on the inside edge of this sealing ring, because that isn't something you want in the engine. Okay, so I'm going to grab a little bit more here. Make sure I've got it. Okay. And there'll be some excess when you press it in, and then you can just remove that after the fact, okay? One thing though, when you set this stuff down, make sure that you cap it again really quickly, because it does tend to be fairly runny. So I've got that accomplished. I don't have any sealant on the inside edge of that sealing ring, okay? So now I'm positioning my sleeve over the top there. I am going to grab my mandrel. This could be a socket as well. And now I'm going to just bring it all the way down to the top there of the crankcase. I can now remove this sleeve because it's been bridged, because I also don't want to be scoring the crankcase at all. I'm going to put the mandrel back on it, okay? And now I'm just going to drive this home till it is so I've got it flush with the crankcase now. And now I can take my socket and start driving it. So if it's good to have a little bit of a sense of what 4.5 millimeters looks like, what your driving depth needs to be, but gotta go slow here, okay? You gotta go slow so you don't overdo it. You don't want to drive that seal into the bearing. Okay, see how it's recessed now? I know I'm not enough. I know I'm not far enough. Now, here's where your caliper comes in handy. So, Here we go. Let's power it on. Make sure that I'm teared. Okay, and you're going to use the bottom side here, the bottom end. You see that little stem? What I'm going to do is catch the edge of the seal and also the edge of the crankcase and just see what I'm looking at there. That's actually pretty deep. I've gone a little too deep. I'm going to make sure I grab this again here. You got to take a number of measurements to, that's 4.6. 4.1. 4.8. 4.7. So I may have actually driven it a little too deep. One way I can know that is by working the crank here. Now the crank is going to move a little bit harder because the seal is coming up against the edge of that, right? But I'm not hearing any metal. So I'm like about a 2/100ths of a millimeter low. And that's probably okay. I've worked with enough of these saws where even up to 5 millimeters is probably fine. So we'll now just walk away from this, let the sealant set up. We should have everything ready to go, or protected and ready to go, sealed on this side, so that we can now work on the other side of the saw. And so one of the things that we learned here today, I went a little too fast there. I should have, that last tap I gave it, I should have maybe measured it first. And that last tap was a little bit too hard. And I ended up driving it just a hair too low. But I do think we're okay because I don't hear the bearing, nothing's rubbing up against the seal there. So we should be golden, I guess. That is the crank seal install on the ignition side, and now we will proceed with working on the clutch side. All right, so it is more of a process, but it's not really any harder. Maybe even in some respects a little easier to install this side. But so I've gone ahead and taken my little rag out from the oiler hole here, and two places that I'm gonna couple places I'm gonna use some alcohol here with a Q-tip to just kind of degrease. So that is where the X-ring on the oiler is going to seat against. And so I'm just going to apply a little bit of rubbing alcohol there. I'm going to do the same. Now back in here where these edges are in the oiler, that's really not relevant. I mean, we got a rubber hose that's going to come up against that. But what I do want to do is just kind of get some alcohol on the surrounding edge and to degrease that. because I've learned that it's not a bad idea, especially if you're not cracking open the oiler off, to clean in behind here very frequently. It's worthwhile putting a little bit of sealant on the oiler. I'll show you where that is to help seal around the oiler hose here, as well as the X-ring. And another spot that I like to do this for, because again the oiler housing is gonna slip inside the crankshaft here, and there's an O-ring on the oiler, but I'm also gonna put a little bit of sealant on that outside edge of that oiler housing, up against the edge of the inside edge of that oiler housing. Again, just to try and guarantee that there is a pretty good seal, and that won't contribute to an air leak, which can happen. Those O-rings can sometimes, I don't know, get prolapsed or get dented, compressed to the point where they actually don't function the way they're supposed to, and so they can contribute to an air leak, which then will give you some obvious issues with your saws running. So we got those cleaned. So let me go get the oiler now. All right, let's continue working on the crank seal here for the clutch side. So that involves the oiler. So this is the old seal. Okay. So I don't know if you can tell here. But there's a little bit of a lip right there where the oil seal is. Okay. So that end, or this side of the oil seal, has got to be about 0.5 millimeters above this side of the oiler housing. And that's at that elevation, it's perfectly flush here on the inside of the oiler housing, and it has to be so that it doesn't interfere with the oiler gear, okay? So that's really crucial. There's a couple ways that you can install this. One is you can put the oil seal up here. You do, again, thin layer of sealant on the outside, a little bit of grease will go on the inside of the seal when you slip this over the crankshaft when the time comes. And to get this in place, you can either position it in place and take it up to a vise and press it home that way. You can potentially create your own homemade device that will press it home. But on both of those accounts, you have to be careful that you don't get it pressed in too far. Okay? Now, fortunately, well, I mean, it just depends on what you have for service tools and what you are willing to invest in. Fortunately for me, I already have a fitting sleeve for another saw that works perfect for this. So let me go get that and show you what it is. So what we're talking about is here's the fitting tool. This is a crankcase fitting tool. It works for the 257, 254, and 262. It also, the sleeve that accompanies it works for some other saws in terms of being able to protect bearings and so forth. But what you're looking at is this sleeve right here. And as it turns out, this little lip right here on the inside of this tool perfectly fits the seal and drives this home. When you drive it home flush, it keeps this up exactly 0.5 millimeters and drives the seal home flush on that. So it's absolutely perfect for that in this case. So that's what I'm going to use. Otherwise, what I would do is just simply put this into a vise, press it home flush, and then just be very careful before I press it too far. Just measure it to make sure that I'm not leaving it out too far, nor pressing it perfectly flush with the outer edge there. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is get the old seal out, and that's fairly easy to do. Here's your oiler gear. If you haven't taken your oiler completely apart, you need to be careful. What you're going to do is on the opposite side, here's where the oiler gear is. You're on the opposite side, just take a straight edge right here and just, knock that out until it falls out on its own. And just use a hammer and a stout straight edge. There, it's just going to pop out like that. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is, before we proceed, I'll be back at you here in a second, I'm going to go ahead and just clean up that surface right around there, right around the X-ring, make sure that there's no grease on it, and I'm going to go ahead and clean up around the inside edge of the oiler here, above where the O-ring is going to go, and clean up on the oil seal mating surface there to get that degreased. So I'll do that off camera and then be back at you. All right, let's continue on here. So let's do the seal before we do anything else on the oiler. I did not have to take the guts of the oiler apart, which was good. All right, so you've already seen this, but this is the installation sleeve that is going to be needed once we've installed this into the crankcase housing. But I've just pre-installed the oil seal on it, and it's just as an aid, right? So I'm going to be positioning it as flush as I can right here in the housing, and then I'll put this installation tool, and you could do it if you were using a socket, you could do that as well. So I'll position that over that and drive it home. But the first thing I'm going to do is what I did previously on the ignition side when we installed that seal. And I'm just going to get a little bit of sealant on the seal here. So I noticed when I cleaned the inside of the housing here, probably from previous oil seal work, is that there's little tiny scorings in there. And that is why this sealant needs to be used, because those scorings could actually pass air, okay? And create a slight air leak and running problems. So that's why this is recommended. And then after this is installed, we will make sure that we don't have too much or any sealant on the inside edge of this. So at any rate, okay, before I continue, let's get our sealant under control here. You got a little bit of time if you use something like Moto Seal before it completely sets up. All right, So I've got my sealant on the outside there. I'm going to go ahead and position this as flush as I can visually. And then I'm going to put my crank install tool here, which is actually designed to install seals. In this particular one, it installs it at that 0.5 millimeter that we need. And I can drive this particular tool all the way down and it'll leave that edge that we need. So when I fill it bottom out, I can remove it. See, our sleeve is removed, and I've got an edge up here that's working pretty well. And it's still not quite down where it needs to be, I can see. I'm going to clean up my install tool here before this sealant sets up. Get that cleaned up. And that turned out to be, I think I had the wrong installation tool. It's raised about a full millimeter. I need to get it down a little more. And as it turned out, the one that I actually needed was the crank tool for the Husqvarna 268, which is the same tool that you would use for the Jonsered, because they were made by the same company. So at any rate, there's the part. So that's the mandrel. The one I used there for the 257 had a full millimeter. And this has a less of an edge to it, and it's right at that appropriate distance. So we're going to do this again. Okay. Now let's see where we're at. Yes, you may not see it, but there is a little bit of a lip right there on the end, which is what we need. And if we look on the inside, we can see that the seal is perfectly flush on the inside. Okay, so now I'm going to take a rag and I'm just going to clean up all of this sealant. This is going to be facing the bearing, and we want this all gone. So I'll finish cleaning this up off camera and be back at you. All right, so I got the sealing surfaces nice, and one little bit of sealant was on the inside of the seal. All right, I blew that out. Everything's clean now, and if I turn it on the side, you can see that little bit of an edge. That little bit of an edge of the seal, that's a 0.5 millimeter. And so that crank installation sleeve for the 268 and 272 Husqvarna is actually designed for that very purpose. Although, you know, I've never, and I've come across that with other saws, I've never seen it mentioned anywhere. It probably is, but at least not in any of the service manuals I've seen. But boy, that is so handy to have it perfectly installed. And there's just no second guesswork. So, you know, it's probably $50, $60, $70 for that crank install tool. I don't even use it for a crank install. I use it for, you know, those kinds of purposes. So we got that taken care of. Now let's get our new oiler hose, which there's your part number for that. Okay. Get that installed. And we're going to pop that over the pickup body. Super easy. Okay. We're going to slip on a brand new O-ring. Here is the part number for that. I always have a bunch of extra ones on hand. Okay, that's going to get slipped on that little groove that you can hopefully see right there. And because that fits on the inside housing of the crankcase, that has a tendency to sometimes get crimped and pinched and prolapsed. So that's why that's a design flaw and a failure point for leakage. And whenever you remove these oilers, you need to inspect them really carefully. And when you put them on slowly. It's really just not a bad idea to replace those each and every time you take an oiler off. So that's one thing. And so what I'm going to do, let me point here with a dental pick. Hopefully this is in focus. So right here on this bottom inside edge, all the way around, I'm going to put a little bit of MotoSeal. Just to give a little bit, and I'm going to be pressing down like this. It's going to come up against the crankcase housing there. The bearings are in here. And that's just going to support this O-ring to seal it pretty good so that we don't have air leaks. And if there's gunk getting back in here and there's an air leak, then because under vacuum, you could also be getting debris in there. So I put just a little bit around there. I'm also going to install the X-ring here. And before I do that, I'm going to put a little bit of sealant on that side of the X-ring O-ring, which is right here. And that part number is right there. Okay. So this all has to be done in, pretty quick timing here. So, and then I'm also going to put a little bit of sealant right here on this side of this oiler hose, and you'll see as I install it into the crankcase why I'm doing that. It's just, again, to seal things better, to keep as much oil from getting in behind this housing as possible through a potential weak point here. And every time I maybe pop this out to check it and inspect it, I'm going to have to, degrease that orifice and apply some more sealant. But hopefully you rarely have to do that. So anyway, let's get at it here. Okay. There you go. All right, so my first task, and I got to be prepared to have plenty of towels handy because the sealant is it's runny and it's sticky. It makes a mess, as all lubricants and sealants and anti-seizes tend to cause. All right, so I'm using MotoSeal. You could use another type of sealant if you prefer. Okay, so I'm just gonna do something like this. Try and keep as clean as possible. Okay, there we are. And then I'm just going to drop this in place. But you got to get that pickup body in where it needs to go. The hose is now straight, and there, you need it to pop in at a little bit of an angle. Then you can press this home like that. And if you did it right and didn't get too much sealant on there, we got a good seal here. I am going to just kiss a little bit of that with my finger, because I don't want too much sealant getting on the mating surfaces of the oiler, meaning right here, I want the rubber to do that job. Okay, so now I'm going to grab a little bit of that sealant. And probably use my dental pick here as an aid. Just grab a little bit of it like so. And I'm just going to apply it right there like so. Now I'm going to press the X-ring onto that. Okay. We got that done. Now, using the dental pick again as an aid, I'm going to continue to apply some of this Moto Seal around the inside of this housing next to you could use your finger too, which is going to be even messier than this. Try and keep it off the surface, inside surface. You don't want sealant in where the bearings are. I don't really worry about it building up on the dental pick because I can easily clean the dental pick. So you can just see it's a fairly thin film or bead of sealant around that inner edge. Now I've done this over the last few years on all of the vintage Husqvarna and now Jonsered saws that have this kind of oiler design. And yeah, I swear by it. It really does help maintain that seal and keep crap from around here. It's a good best practice that I've learned from other saw builders that work on these vintage saws. All right, so now we got our oil seal in place, right? We've got our sealant around there. We've got our sealant around the X-ring, our sealant around the oiler hose. We're going to grab our installation sleeve right here and pop that. So what's that doing is that there is an edge right here on the crankshaft, and that is bridging that. If you don't do that, or use some other thing like microfiche or something else to bridge that edge, you will prolapse this seal right here and wreck it, okay? So now we are ready to send this home. And one thing I'm going to do to help make this installation a little bit easier, as I mentioned before, and it's recommended, only because I think it just makes it slip a little easier. But I'm going to take a little bit of grease and just apply it to the inside of that seal. And then I can wipe off the excess after it's installed, okay? So here we go. Okay. Everything's looking good. I can pull that sleeve off, and you can see there's where that edge is. We got a pretty tight seal there. Everything's all the way down. We're ready to finish installing the oiler housing. And what we're going to do there, we've got 3 bolts. They're going to take a 3mm hex or Allen head, and there is no torque specification. You don't want to overly torque it, of course, but the reason why there's no torque spec is once you get it fairly hand tight, you're just going to use Loctite. That's what they recommend. So we're going to put a little shot of blue Loctite here on this, on each one of these screws. Try not to make this stuff, I don't know, I don't like these dispensing tubes. Sometimes it's hard to control the Loctite. Anyway, I'm going to cover a little bit just on the end of each one of these screws. Get the air out. Must be getting low on this tube. There we go. Okay. Drop that one in place. Clean off my hands here a little bit, and then grab my 3mm wrench. Send all 3 of these home. Okay, now you can see that there's gaps here, right? You know the oil and dirt's going to get back there. And we don't have a tight seal all the way around there, so over time there is going to get gunk back there, and you'll have to take this off. But if you don't, because we put the sealant, we have fresh O-rings, we use sealant on the X-ring and on the oiler hose, we shouldn't have to worry about debris getting where it shouldn't. We shouldn't have to worry about debris getting in behind this seal and where the bearings are. And so you can probably go quite a while without popping this off. But if you pop it off, I really do recommend replacing the O-rings. But if they are still good and you refit them, then obviously if you're going to use the sealant trick that I use, you'll need to clean that up really well. You'll need to degrease everything, clean the oiler well, basically like you're rebuilding the saw, and cleaning the crankcase really well and degreasing stuff where you can. So at any rate, there we go. Seals installed, oilers installed, and we can probably, proceed with installing the worm gear, the washer and the worm gear, the clutch and all that type of stuff. So that, I guess, Bowman out. We will be back at you when we continue working on the clutch.